They laughed when he walked into the courtroom. Dusty boots, no lawyer, no suit, no power behind him, just a worn briefcase and eyes that had seen too much. Whispers filled the air. He won't last an hour. Even the judge smirked. But what no one saw coming was this. The man they mocked was about to change everything. Not with money, not with status, but with truth. This isn't just the story of a courtroom battle. It's the story of one man standing alone against a system built to silence him and shaking it to its core. It's about courage that doesn't shout but stands firm, about justice not bought but earned, and about the quiet fire inside those the world calls powerless. By the end of this trial, the room that laughed at Ibrahim Traoré stood in silence, because sometimes one honest voice is louder than the whole world. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. Ibrahim walked in. No expensive suit, no legal team behind him. Just calm, quiet determination. People turned their heads. Some smirked, some whispered. "Is he lost?" One man murmured. "This'll be over in minutes." Said another. Even the judge, draped in his gold-trimmed robe, chuckled when Ibrahim introduced himself. "You're representing yourself?" he said with a smirk. "Well, this should be amusing." Soft laughter rippled through the room. But Ibrahim didn't flinch. He placed his old, scuffed briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of papers, handwritten, worn at the edges, but packed with substance. Somewhere near the back, a woman sat up straighter. Maybe she saw something the others didn't, because this wasn't just any man. And today wouldn't be just any day. The judge banged his gavel. "Go ahead, Mr. Traoré, if you can," he said with a crooked smile. Ibrahim stood. His voice was calm, almost a whisper. "Your Honor," he said, "I don't stand here with power or money. I stand here with something stronger, the truth." The room shifted. A few leaned in. Was he serious? Then, slowly and clearly, Ibrahim began. He laid out his case with quiet confidence. His points weren't flashy, but they were sharp, backed by solid facts, forgotten laws, and court rulings most had never heard of. Each word hit harder than the last. No drama, no shouting, just pure, undeniable clarity. By the time he finished his opening argument, no one was laughing. Not even the judge. A heavy silence hung in the air, not of confusion, but of rising respect. The judge, trying to hide his discomfort, cleared his throat. "You're clever," he said, voice tighter now, "but cleverness won't be enough." Then came the witnesses, all expected to crush Ibrahim's case. They walked in confidently, ready to knock him down. But Ibrahim stayed calm. He didn't argue. He didn't try to intimidate. He just asked the right questions. Simple ones, clean ones. And one by one, the witnesses started to slip. One hesitated. Another stumbled. A third finally told the truth. The courtroom, once full of quiet laughs, now leaned in with curiosity, and maybe even a little awe. Where did he learn all this? Someone whispered. The answer wasn't fancy. Ibrahim learned from old books, flickering candles, quiet nights, and the belief that justice mattered more than winning. Each word he spoke filled the room with something rare. Hope. In just 3 hours, he turned doubters into believers. But the hardest part was still to come. The judge wasn't ready to let go. He wanted one final win. So he threw out a twisted, complex legal question, the kind that made seasoned lawyers sweat. The room held its breath. This was supposed to break him, but Ibrahim didn't flinch. He closed his eyes for a second, not to search for words, but to remember. He remembered the long nights reading alone, the faces of villagers who believed in him, the reason he stood there. This wasn't about pride. It was about truth. He opened his eyes, looked the judge straight in the face, and gave his answer slowly, clearly. And this time, the room didn't just listen. It believed. He didn't just answer the question. He broke it down so clearly, so simply, that even a child could understand it. By the time he finished speaking, even the court reporter had stopped typing. Stunned by the power and clarity of his explanation, the judge's face tightened. He now saw what was really happening. This young man wasn't standing there for pride or ego. He was standing for something much bigger, and he was winning. The mood in the courtroom had shifted. People who had come to laugh or watch a quick defeat were now leaning forward, hearts racing. In the back, an old man quietly wiped his eyes. A young woman clutched the pendant around her neck and whispered a prayer. Even the guards near the doors looked at Ibrahim with something close to respect. Every time he spoke, it was like light pouring into a room that had been dark for far too long. His words weren't just arguments, they were truth, made simple. They carried weight. The thick stone walls of the courthouse, soaked in years of corruption and injustice, almost seemed to tremble. Ibrahim wasn't just winning a legal fight. He was waking people up, reminding them that courage isn't found in wealth or suits or titles. It's found in standing your ground when everyone expects you to fall, and rising higher each time. They try to knock you down, but deep in the judge's heart, a storm was still brewing. He wasn't ready to lose, and the hardest moment of the trial was still ahead, on the third day. As the sun hung low and hot in the sky, something unexpected happened. A powerful lawyer entered the courtroom, sent by those afraid of what Ibrahim was doing. They whispered to the judge, slipped him papers, outside. The rumors started. They're trying to bury him. They'll never let him win. The judge suddenly announced that new evidence would be introduced. Ibrahim nodded calmly. No fear, no shock when the new lawyer spoke. His words were flashy, complicated, and intentionally confusing. For a moment, doubt flickered in the courtroom. But Ibrahim didn't flinch. He knew the truth. And real strength doesn't come from being the loudest in the room. It comes from having a heart that refuses to lie. Bit by bit, he tore apart the so-called evidence, showed how it was all just smoke and mirrors. His voice stayed steady. His hands never shook. And in that moment, the people saw it clearly. You can throw an army at one honest man, but you can't defeat the truth. And Ibrahim was living proof. By the fourth day, the mood was heavier. Clouds gathered outside. Inside, the tension was thick. The new lawyer was relentless, tossing question after question like stones meant to break Ibrahim down. Still, Ibrahim stood tall. He didn't rush. He didn't falter. He answered each one with quiet clarity, building something stronger than a defense, a connection. Even the judge, who once sneered, now looked uneasy, because the laughter was gone. The room wasn't mocking anymore. They were listening. A woman near the front wiped tears from her eyes and whispered, "We're watching history." And she was right. This wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. It had become something far bigger, a fight for the soul of justice. And leading the charge was the man they all once dismissed. Just when it seemed nothing more could surprise the room, Ibrahim reached into his folder and pulled out a worn, faded envelope. "This," he said softly, "is the truth they tried to bury." The judge tried to interrupt. The opposing lawyer jumped up in protest, but it was too late. Inside the envelope was a letter, a forgotten testimony written by a brave worker who had risked everything. His words told a story of corruption, stolen land, shattered families, and crushed dreams. It ended with a plea, "If anyone ever reads this, please fight for us." As Ibrahim read the letter aloud, the courtroom fell silent. You could hear people breathing. You could feel the weight of the truth sinking in. Tears slid down faces once filled with mockery. The truth wasn't complicated. It wasn't polished or pretty. It was raw, real, and impossible to ignore. In that moment, Ibrahim was no longer just defending a case. He was speaking for the countless people who had been silenced for years. By the fifth day, something had shifted in the judge. The lines of amusement on his face had hardened into something else, regret, maybe even shame. He could barely look Ibrahim in the eye. The people could feel it too. The man they once laughed at had become the man carrying their broken hopes on his back, not with anger or ego, but with truth and the quiet strength of someone who knows he's right. When Ibrahim finished reading the letter, no one clapped. There was just silence, a deep, aching silence, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. And in that silence, the judge did something no one expected. He gave a small, almost invisible nod, but it was enough. An apology, an admission, a surrender. The courtroom, once filled with doubt and cruelty, now overflowed with something else entirely: respect, gratitude, and the quiet love people feel for someone who never gave up on them, even when the world did. And still, the final moment loomed. The verdict. The sixth day arrived quietly. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the reporters wrote in silence, afraid to break the sacred stillness in the room. Ibrahim stood alone again, his clothes still simple, his hands still steady. Across from him, the opposing lawyer fumbled with papers, out of tricks and out of time. When Ibrahim spoke, he didn't just talk about laws. He spoke about fathers who lost their land, mothers who buried their dreams, children who believed justice was just a story adults told them at night. Each word landed like a stone, building something that couldn't be broken, the foundation of truth. Even the judge leaned in, eyes wide, trying not to miss a single word, because this wasn't a speech anymore. It was a moment in history. When Ibrahim finished, there was no applause, just the sound of hearts cracking open. It was his last chance to speak before the ruling. The air felt heavy, like the whole city was holding its breath, listening through the walls. Ibrahim paused. He looked around the room, not with pride, not with defiance, but with quiet love, and then, in the simplest words, he told the story of a boy from a tiny village in Burkina Faso, a boy who once believed that justice belonged only to the rich and powerful. That boy had seen too much too young. He'd watched neighbors lose everything. He'd heard good men cry in the dark when no one was around. And one night, quietly, he made himself a promise: someday, I'll stand for the ones no one stands for. That boy was Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't speak for himself that day. He spoke for every invisible, forgotten soul who had ever whispered their truth into the wind, hoping someone might hear. And when he finished, he didn't beg. He didn't raise his voice in triumph. He simply said, "Let truth be enough." A single tear rolled down the cheek of the courtroom clerk. And for the first time in 6 days, the judge looked away, blinking hard. He announced the verdict would be delivered the next morning. The seventh and final day, the courtroom emptied. Slowly, people didn't rush. They walked out with heavy steps and full hearts. Some prayed, some cried. But everyone knew tomorrow wasn't just about Ibrahim anymore. It was about whether truth could still win in a world that had forgotten how. Ibrahim stayed behind, sitting quietly on an old wooden bench. He wasn't afraid. He had already given everything, every word, every breath. Now, he simply waited. Outside, the crowd had grown. Under the fading sun, they stood, no chants, no noise, just silence. Candlelight flickered in the hands of farmers, students, mothers, people who had never met, but were united by one man's courage and the hope that maybe, just maybe, good could still win. As the sky turned dark, one voice called out, "We stand with Ibrahim." And like a wave, the cry echoed, across rooftops, across rivers, into the hearts of millions. The next morning came heavy with clouds. There was no rain, but the air felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ibrahim arrived at the courthouse alone. No security, no convoy, just him, carrying nothing but the quiet strength of truth. The streets were packed. Thousands stood in silence. Some held candles, others held hands. Even the ones who once laughed at him now stood still, eyes lowered, hearts pounding. Inside, the judge walked in. His hands trembled slightly as he held the verdict. When he looked at Ibrahim, it wasn't mockery in his eyes anymore. It was something closer to fear, or maybe, finally, respect. Ibrahim bowed his head and whispered a quiet prayer, not for himself, but for the people who had trusted him to carry their hopes this far. And then, the moment, the judge cleared, his throat, his voice cracking. In the case of the people versus the powers of corruption, you could hear a pin drop. He looked up, straight into Ibrahim's calm, steady eyes, and in that look, something passed between them, something wordless, but heavy. Truth. Unbroken, undeniable. The judge continued, "We find in favor of the people. Justice shall be restored." For a second, there was only silence, and then, like a dam bursting, the courtroom erupted. Sobs, cries, laughter, the raw sound of a crowd that had held pain for too long. Old men wept openly. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Journalists dropped their pens, hands shaking, eyes full of tears. And Ibrahim, he didn't raise his fists. He didn't yell. He just placed a hand on his chest and bowed his head, a silent thank you to everyone who believed, especially when it was hardest. Outside, bells rang from churches and mosques alike. People embraced strangers. Songs rose from the streets, across the nation, and even beyond it. One name was whispered again and again, not with noise, but with pride: Ibrahim Traoré, a man who proved that even the smallest voice, if it's honest, can shake the heavens. As Ibrahim stepped out of the courtroom, the crowd parted like a river. No one screamed. No one cheered wildly. They simply raised their hands in quiet salute, a sacred, deep gesture of respect. A little girl approached him, her dress torn, her shoes broken, but in her tiny hand, she held out a single red flower, the last one from her family's small garden. "For you," she whispered. Ibrahim knelt, took the flower gently, and tucked it into his pocket, close to his heart. Then he lifted her up so she could see the sea of faces and whispered, "You are why we fight." Her eyes widened in awe. Somewhere in the crowd, her mother began to cry. That day, Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a leader. He became a symbol, a living reminder that truth, courage, and kindness still matter. That no matter how dark the world gets, a single light can guide millions. As he walked through the celebrating crowd, a strange quietness followed him. Not because people weren't happy, but because the moment was too big for words. Old men dropped to their knees just to touch his hand. Mothers lifted their children high into the air, as if saying, "This is the future you gave us." An elderly woman pressed a worn photograph into his hand. Her son, young, brave, long gone. "Today," she whispered, "you gave me back his dream." Ibrahim held the photo close, eyes shining. In that moment, the court's decision wasn't just a legal victory, it was a resurrection, a promise that no sacrifice had been for nothing. As the clouds finally broke and sunlight spilled over the city, the people of Burkina Faso believed again, not just in Ibrahim, but in themselves. The celebrations continued, but Ibrahim quietly slipped away. No interviews, no parades, just a man walking under the open African sky. He returned to his village, the one where it all began. Children played barefoot in the dust. Women pounded millet in wooden bowls. Life was still simple, still beautiful. He sat under the old baobab tree and closed his eyes. He listened to laughter, to wind, to the heartbeat of a healing nation. The village chief came forward carrying a hand-woven mat. "We saved this for you," he said. It wasn't gold. It wasn't grand. Just a simple symbol of home. Ibrahim knelt and accepted it with both hands. The chief smiled softly. "No matter how high the storm lifts you, never forget the ground that made you strong." Ibrahim nodded and promised silently that he never would. The next morning, Ibrahim returned to the capital, not for praise, but for purpose, standing before a crowd of farmers, students, elders, and soldiers. He spoke not like a ruler, but like a brother. "I'm not here to rule over you," he said. "I'm here to remind you, the power has always been yours." He pointed not to himself, but to them. "You are the builders of this nation. Never again let anyone make you forget that." And the people cried, not tears of pain, but tears of pride. Because in Ibrahim, they didn't just see a leader. They saw a mirror, showing them the strength, the courage, and the dignity they had always carried within. In just 7 days, a courtroom became a cathedral of hope, and a man once mocked became a legend. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that truth, courage, and justice still matter, please hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what part of Ibrahim's journey meant the most to you. Your words might be the light someone else needs. Let's share this story far and wide, because you never know who's quietly fighting their own battle and needs to be reminded. Never judge someone by what you see, because inside every heart is the power to change everything. Like, share, comment, and never ever stop believing.